talking about the Strategic Stability Dialogue this week in Geneva. It was set up when President Putin met President Biden in Geneva in mid-June, and they decided that they would meet as soon as possible. The two countries would meet as soon as possible to discuss two things. First, how to set up a negotiation to replace the New START treaty. One of the first acts of President Biden was to extend the New START treaty by 5 years, as is permitted by the treaty, and President Putin was willing to do that. So we have a 5-year extension of the treaty until February of 2026. That means there is time to negotiate a follow-on treaty, but there are some very difficult issues that will arise. The United States is concerned about some of these exotic new weapon systems that the Russians have been building and deploying, especially some of these systems like the nuclear propelled cruise missile that is sea-launched. There is also an air-launched ballistic missile extremely capable. So there are some new systems that the United States wants to get a handle on. We're also very concerned about the preponderance of Russian warheads available for non-strategic, shorter range missile systems. So it's going to be a complicated treaty and difficult to negotiate with many new technical aspects to it. So I really urge the administration to get moving on it right away. And apparently from the reporting I've seen from the Geneva meetings, they did talk very seriously both about what we should be discussing in the follow-on to a New START treaty, but also some important new issues related to technological developments and some of the new challenges that, for example, cyber technology is bringing to our strategic stability relationship with the Russian Federation. So as I see, they will be meeting again at the end of September in a plenary session, again, a very serious and big formal plenary meeting. But in the meantime, they will be having some informal discussions about setting up technical working groups. This is all good news from my perspective. I do think that it means that both sides are taking this, this format and this venue extremely seriously, and will try to work to carry forward the agenda. So that was a good sign in the bilateral US-Russian relationship, despite the very dire situation in our overarching relationship with the Russian Federation. And again, here, I think President Biden's message was extremely clear in June when he met with Putin. He had one very clear message: cut it out, talking about in particular the ransomware attacks that had crippled US industry in several ways, and saying that we really needed to get serious about dealing with these criminals in the Russian Federation, and that it was Putin's responsibility to ensure that they could not act with impunity. So I know that's another set of discussions that is going on between the United States and Russia now to try to get a handle on these ransomware attacks and other aspects of the cyber security threat that Russia poses to the United States. And again, I applaud that. It's very, very important, but it just goes to show that our relationship is in a very, very difficult and negative place. The important thing, though, is to think about where we can cooperate. And I think it is important to cooperate on the existential threats, nuclear weapons and the threat of nuclear holocaust. This is an existential threat to the United States. So I believe no matter how bad our overall relationship is, we do need to continue to cooperate in that area. Now, so we have this long-standing strategic stability relationship with the Russian Federation. We began to negotiate with the Soviet Union after the Cuban Missile Crisis to put in place, way back in 1962, but to put in place some negotiated measures to control the military atom. And I think we've done pretty well over the ensuing 50+ years. But what is happening now is extraordinary. The Chinese have always stood to the side and said, we do not need to build up our nuclear arsenal. We can simply keep it at a low level and depend on having surety, having certainty that we will be able to retaliate if anyone attacks us with nuclear weapons. So they kept their nuclear weapons on a low level of alert, but did everything to ensure that should they be attacked with nuclear weapons, they would be able to respond. This is called a second strike retaliatory policy, and they pursued it over all these years. They haven't pursued the kind of approach that the United States and Russia has had. We built up large numbers of weapons and delivery vehicles during the Cold War. And so we have a kind of, as we call it, a first strike stability relationship. Neither has the opportunity to get off a first strike without the other responding. And for that reason, it's very tenuous in some ways and hard in other ways to understand how we could have poured so many resources into building up our nuclear forces. But I will say now that we are building down in equal numbers in a predictable and mutual way. So we keep that parity of numbers, even if our systems are on high alert and in a first strike standoff kind of relationship. But the Chinese were always different. They said, no, we're not going to go that way. We're not going to build up our nuclear forces. We're going to keep them at low numbers and have essentially a second strike retaliatory approach. And indeed, when you look at the numbers that are out there in official documents, the Department of Defense, for example, put out a report last September where they said that the Chinese have approximately 250 warheads in total numbers. Well, the United States and Russia have approximately 4,000 warheads each in total numbers. So you can see the huge disparity. We always say that the United States and Russia have over 90% of the nuclear weapons in the world, with the Chinese, the UK, France, India, Pakistan, and now North Korea being very small arsenals by comparison. So this development that we have seen in the last 2 weeks with 2 ICBM fields being discovered, 110 silos at one place being constructed, 120 silos at another place being constructed. This is very, very worrisome because it seems to signal that the Chinese are changing their policy and going to try to move to more of a direct first strike relationship, build up their forces. This, I think, is very concerning for the United States per se, but it also disturbs the strategic balance between the United States and Russia. I was just reading.
Rose, if I could jump in, and then I think we'll turn to the audience. I just, I'm curious what you see as sort of the next frontier or the next steps in arms control, particularly, I guess initially with Russia. There was a period in the Trump administration, obviously, where there was not a lot of attention to this, and you've already described a bit obviously the extension of the START. I think there's been some movement on the INF front, but as you look to the future, or maybe even as if you were, in the position of advising, as you may well be, the administration, what do you see as sort of the key next challenges in arms control? What are the new technologies that we have to worry about, new threats? Where do you see this going?
Let me talk about 2 particular challenges. I lightly touched on the first when I was making my remarks. The United States is very keen to begin to directly limit Russian warheads because they have a larger number of warheads that they place on top of so-called non-strategic range delivery vehicles that are used in a theater setting and so are deployed against our allies in NATO or in Asia. And so for that reason, the United States for many, many years has been wanting to begin to get a handle on these nuclear warheads that are so-called non-strategic nuclear warheads. The Russians, by contrast, are very concerned that the United States has a large number of warheads that we, the United States, can upload on our strategic range delivery vehicles like ICBMs and SLBMs. And so say the warheads on the submarine missiles that we now have perhaps 6 warheads on them. We could quickly take those numbers up to 8, perhaps even more. And so the Russians are very concerned that we would in that way have a breakout potential from any strategic arms reduction treaty. And so they're keen to get some constraints on our strategic warheads. And so there's some trade space there that I think we can work with them at the negotiating table. The difficulty comes is if we are going to directly limit warheads, what we've done in the past is we've gotten rid of the missiles. The warheads have come off the missiles and gone back into storage. And we've gotten rid of the missiles and we said, okay, now we don't need to worry about the warheads anymore. They're sitting back in storage. But now to try to directly limit warheads to ensure we're monitoring how many they have. They would monitor how many we have to ensure that if we promise to eliminate warheads, that we're eliminating them and they are eliminating them. We have to be able to trust but verify, as we always say. So I think that that is a big technical challenge, directly monitoring in very sensitive facilities. We are concerned about it on the US side. The Russians are concerned about having American inspectors in their sensitive facilities. So this is going to take a lot of work and a lot of effort. Again, the Trump administration started that effort by calling on the Russians to freeze warhead numbers and then proposing to develop a monitoring regime so that that freeze, which would be a kind of unilateral gesture on each side, but if you have a monitoring regime, you begin to turn this unilateral gesture into an actual verifiable limit on warheads. So I think that that precedent was well set in the Trump administration, and I do understand that the Biden administration is carrying that effort forward.